Breaking, Nigel Farage has just unveiled a secret Labour strategy so explosive that MPs across Westminster are demanding Keir Starmer answer immediately. A leaked document reveals plans to use government powers in ways never seen in peacetime Britain to suppress opposition voices. 73 MPs have already signed an emergency motion. When Farage revealed the evidence live on television, the impact shocked audiences across 2 continents and shattered Labour's credibility almost overnight, putting Starmer's leadership at risk within days. Here's how the crisis began. 3 days ago, Farage received an anonymous package at Reform UK headquarters in Westminster. Inside was a 47-page internal Labour strategy, stamped Cabinet Eyes Only, titled Chillingly Operational Framework for Managing Dissenting Political Voices in the Digital Age. Farage's team verified the watermarks, cross-checked the formatting, and confirmed the signatures. This was authentic. But he didn't release it immediately. He examined every page, built his case, and yesterday at 11:43 a.m., he walked into the GB News studios armed with evidence that would send shockwaves through Britain. Sitting across from presenter Patrick Christys, Farage held up the document and delivered his statements with measured, devastating precision. What followed was explosive. Farage stated calmly but with unmistakable intensity that the material showed Starmer's leadership had designed a coordinated system to control dissent through regulatory leverage, media pressure, and online oversight. He accused Labour of constructing a framework that turns state bodies into political tools against critics, and instead of dramatizing, he read straight from the document. One section described how broadcasting regulators could be encouraged to scrutinize outlets accused of persistent anti-government bias. Another outlined methods for urging digital platforms to limit the reach of accounts labeled as spreading harmful political messaging. A further section referenced the use of civil service mechanisms to track and record opposition activity. The reaction was immediate and fierce. Conservative MPs began circulating excerpts online within minutes, Liberal Democrats called for urgent parliamentary debates, and even Labour backbenchers appeared visibly unsettled. A former Home Secretary described the document as the most heavy-handed political framework seen outside extraordinary national emergencies, while constitutional experts warned it clashed directly with democratic norms. Insiders at major broadcasters privately admitted they had sensed growing pressure from the center of government but were stunned to see evidence of a formalized strategy, and just as the shock began to settle, it became clear there was an additional dimension that made the situation even more alarming. The document wasn't just theoretical, it included detailed timelines showing that implementation had already started. Appendix C listed 17 media figures targeted for heightened monitoring by government communications staff. While the names weren't made public, sources confirmed they included leading conservative commentators, well-known podcast hosts, and mainstream journalists critical of Labour. Appendix F detailed meetings already held with social media executives, in which government officials allegedly requested cooperation to manage misinformation, a phrase insiders now interpret as suppressing legitimate political dissent. Most alarming, Section 9 described a strategic communications intervention protocol, essentially establishing a secret government unit tasked with rapidly countering emerging opposition narratives across digital platforms. Consider that, a government-created team specifically devoted to tracking and undermining political opponents online. Civil liberties organizations reacted immediately. Liberty's director called it the infrastructure of digital authoritarianism cloaked in the language of misinformation control, while Index on Censorship labeled it the most serious threat to press freedom in Britain since the Official Secrets Act. These are respected organizations defending fundamental rights, and they are describing a sitting Labour government as authoritarian. Meanwhile, ordinary working-class voters who supported Labour in hopes of change are witnessing the party morph into the very force they feared. Michael Patterson, a 62-year-old former steelworker from Sheffield, stood outside his local job centre yesterday morning, looking exhausted, frustrated, and profoundly betrayed that he told reporters he had voted Labour his entire life, believing Starmer would deliver meaningful reform and honouring promises of transparency and accountability. "Now I learn my government has secret plans to crush dissent," Michael Patterson said, his voice breaking. "I worked 40 years in factories. We fought for the right to speak freely, to criticize power, to hold leaders accountable, and now Labour, my Labour, wants to take that away." His hands shook as he spoke. He is far from alone. Sarah Jenkins, a 57-year-old nurse from Cardiff, broke down during a radio phone-in yesterday afternoon. She had campaigned door-to-door for Labour, persuaded friends and family to vote the same, and genuinely believed Starmer represented a return to honest politics. "I defended him when people called him boring," she sobbed. "I said boring was good, that we needed stability and integrity, and now these secret documents about silencing people? This isn't what I fought for." Her 4-minute call went viral, racking up over 500,000 social media shares within hours. In Newcastle, retired police officer Graham Wilson told ITV News he voted Labour for the first time in 2024 after decades of backing the Conservatives, hoping to escape Tory mismanagement. "I thought I was voting for competence and decency," he said, shaking his head. "Turns out I voted for people who believe British citizens need to be managed and controlled, not represented or served. These are not partisan activists, they are ordinary working people feeling profoundly betrayed by the politicians they trusted." Meanwhile, the politicians behind this authoritarian blueprint continue to enjoy full protections, secure housing, and zero accountability for misleading the public. Cabinet ministers travel with personal security, government cars, and monthly expense accounts worth thousands, while working families wait in line at food banks. Home Secretary Yvette Cooper resides in a multi-million-pound Graysand Favour property in central London, even as pensioners decide between heating and food. Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner moves in armoured vehicles with police escorts, while nurses walk to work through unsafe streets because they cannot afford parking. The contrast is so stark that even lifelong Labour supporters are beginning to question everything they believed. Janet Morrison, who campaigned for Labour in every election since 1997, returned her party membership yesterday with a letter that went viral. "I cannot remain in a party that treats British democracy as an obstacle to manage rather than a principle to defend." Her letter has been shared over 800,000 times, with thousands of former Labour members posting that they are following suit. Then, an unexpected move shook the nation. King Charles, who traditionally remains silent on political matters, broke decades of royal protocol in a single unprecedented act. At yesterday's Privy Council meeting at Buckingham Palace, the King delivered what palace insiders called the strongest political statement from a monarch since Queen Elizabeth's constitutional warnings in the 1970s. "The principles of free expression and open political debate are not merely traditions to be observed," King Charles declared, "they are the very foundation of our constitutional monarchy and parliamentary democracy," King Charles declared. "Any attempt to systematically undermine these principles threatens the delicate balance that has safeguarded British liberty for centuries." The room fell silent. Constitutional experts immediately grasped the weight of his words. When a monarch speaks so pointedly about democratic principles amid a political scandal, the message is unmistakable. Palace insiders revealed Charles personally reviewed the Farage evidence, consulted constitutional scholars, and judged the moment demanded intervention. The optics are devastating for Starmer, the king defending democracy while the prime minister crafts authoritarian strategies. From there, the crisis spiraled. Financial markets reacted violently, the pound dropped sharply, billions were wiped from stock valuations, and investors downgraded Britain's political stability. MPs across all parties demanded answers. Labour fractured internally. Protests erupted in major cities. International allies issued thinly veiled rebukes. Inside Number 10, panic set in as ministers debated, plotted, and quietly discussed contingency plans. Amid the turmoil, Nigel Farage has emerged as a calm, principled defender of free expression. While Labour appears defensive and authoritarian, polls show Reform UK surging to unprecedented heights, with Labour collapsing among its traditional base. The next 72 hours are critical. Parliament reconvenes for an emergency session, legal challenges are being readied, and King Charles is expected to speak again on democratic principles. This crisis will be studied for decades as the defining moment when British democracy either stood its ground or began slipping toward authoritarianism. At the center of the storm stands Keir Starmer, increasingly isolated and teetering on the edge. The question is no longer whether he can recover, it is whether he survives the week. Senior labor figures are quietly maneuvering to shield themselves from the fallout, with multiple sources confirming that a core group of cabinet ministers has begun distancing themselves entirely, briefing journalists off the record that they were never informed of the full scope of the dissent management strategy. One veteran MP described Westminster as entering endgame politics, where survival has overtaken loyalty and every conversation carries career-defining weight. Party whips are struggling to maintain discipline as constituency inboxes overflow with demands for resignations and accountability. What makes this crisis uniquely perilous is that it strikes at the core of Britain's constitutional framework. This is no longer merely a political scandal over internal documents or strategy, it is a direct question of whether a sitting Prime Minister authorized, endorsed, or tolerated actions designed to suppress free expression and undermine democratic oversight. Legal experts warn that if Parliament or the courts determine government agencies were weaponized for political purposes, the repercussions could extend far beyond resignation, potentially triggering inquiries with long-lasting constitutional consequences. Pressure on Starmer is now relentless. Every hour without a credible response reinforces the perception that he has lost control of both government and narrative. Allies who once defended him publicly have gone silent, a silence louder than any condemnation, and even senior figures traditionally loyal to party leadership privately acknowledge the damage may already be irreversible. As Britain waits, the nation stands at a defining crossroads. Either transparency, accountability, and democratic principles are decisively upheld, or public trust in government suffers a blow that could take a generation to repair. The coming days will determine more than a single Prime Minister's legacy, they will shape how power, dissent, and democracy coexist in Britain for years. All eyes are fixed on Westminster, where decisions made in the immediate future will decide whether this crisis ends in reform or collapse. With each passing hour, a sense of inevitability grows heavier. Senior civil servants are reportedly drawing up contingency plans for a potential leadership transition, quietly preparing to maintain continuity should events spiral further. Parliamentary staff describe an atmosphere unlike any seen in decades. Normally composed MPs pace corridors, whisper urgently into phones, and avoid cameras altogether, signaling that the notion of this crisis simply blowing over has vanished. Too many institutions are now involved, too many red lines crossed, and too much evidence exposed publicly for a simple resolution to remain plausible. Public confidence is eroding at alarming speed. Overnight polling shows trust in government communication collapsing across every demographic, even among voters who previously identified as politically disengaged. Analysts warn this is particularly perilous, because when disengaged citizens lose trust, they rarely merely switch allegiance, they withdraw entirely, leaving a vacuum that could redefine the political landscape. They disengage completely, eroding the very fabric of democracy. Community leaders, faith groups, and business associations have begun issuing statements demanding restraint, transparency, and adherence to democratic norms, an extraordinary intervention that highlights how far this crisis has spread beyond party politics. Meanwhile, the leaked document is under rigorous forensic review by independent experts, journalists, and legal scholars. Each new analysis reinforces the conclusion that this was not a vague discussion paper but a fully structured operational plan. The language is exact, the chains of authority meticulously outlined, and the timelines chillingly specific. With every revelation, it becomes increasingly impossible for Labour's leadership to claim this was merely exploratory work without real-world intent. Starmer's isolation is now unmistakable. Formerly vocal allies now offer only procedural remarks about process and ongoing review, and the absence of clear support from key figures is interpreted, rightly or wrongly, as quiet preparation for his removal. Political history shows that when a leader loses the confidence of both party and public simultaneously, tenure is measured in days, not months. Britain now waits for the pivotal moment, the emergency parliamentary session that could either restore a measure of trust or confirm the worst fears of a nation already unsettled. Regardless of the outcome, this episode has permanently reshaped the political landscape, exposing deep anxieties about power, accountability, and freedom in the digital age. It is a stark reminder that democracy is not self-sustaining, it must be actively defended, even when doing so is uncomfortable. As the moment approaches, the question dominating every conversation is no longer what happened, but what happens next. Senior figures across the political spectrum now privately acknowledge that Britain's governing institutions are being tested in real time. The upcoming emergency parliamentary session is expected to be one of the most intense and consequential in modern history, with MPs preparing questions aimed not merely at embarrassing the Prime Minister, but at establishing responsibility, intent, and accountability at the highest levels of government. There is a growing consensus that evasive answers or procedural deflections will only accelerate Labour's internal collapse. The damage is no longer hypothetical. Local party offices report waves of resignations from activists, councillors, and long-standing members who feel morally compromised by continued affiliation. Trade union leaders, once a reliable pillar of support for Starmer, are reportedly re-evaluating their ties to party leadership, questioning whether ongoing backing aligns with their commitments to civil liberties and democratic principles. This internal hollowing threatens Labour's ability to govern effectively, even if it technically retains a parliamentary majority. At the same time, public scrutiny has intensified far beyond anything Downing Street anticipated. Independent journalists and digital investigators are tracing links between the leaked framework and recent regulatory actions, media pressures, targeted campaigns, and unexplained policy shifts. Every correlation, whether fully verified or not, reinforces the perception that the document reflects a mindset already shaping decision-making at the heart of government. In politics, perception can be as destructive as proof, and Labour is losing control of both. The wider implications are impossible to ignore. Britain has long positioned itself as a model of democratic restraint, where power operates within unwritten but deeply respected norms, but this crisis exposes just how fragile those norms are when tested by fear, control, and technological reach. The debate has expanded beyond a single party or leader into a national reckoning over how dissent is handled in a digital age and who determines where the lines are drawn. As night descends over Westminster, the atmosphere is tense and uncertain. Supporters hope for contrition and reform, opponents anticipate resignation or removal. The public watches with a mix of anger, anxiety, and disbelief. One fact is already undeniable: the illusion that such a strategy could exist without consequence has been shattered. The coming days will do more than close a chapter in British politics. They will redefine the boundaries of trust between the state and the people it claims to serve. And as dawn approaches, the full reality sinks in. This is no longer a story Labour can manage with messaging, procedural language, or delayed reviews. Too many institutions have now been drawn into its orbit: Parliament, the courts, the Crown, the markets, the unions, the public, each acting independently, yet all converging on the same conclusion: something fundamental has gone wrong at the center of power. Veteran observers note that British politics rarely collapses in a single, dramatic instant. Instead, it fractures quietly, trust erodes, allies step back one by one, and the slow realization sets in that leadership has become a liability rather than an anchor. That process now appears well underway. The silence from Downing Street is no longer strategic, it is symptomatic. When a Prime Minister cannot reassure his own side, command institutional confidence, or convincingly address the public, authority drains rapidly. What happens next may unfold faster than anyone anticipates: a resignation framed as principled, a leadership challenge cloaked in the language of renewal, or a parliamentary confrontation that leaves no room to retreat. Each path leads to the same destination: the end of Starmer's control over events. History shows that once momentum shifts this decisively, survival becomes almost impossible. No matter the size of the majority or the polish of the defense, the stakes for the public extend far beyond one man or one party. This moment exposes an uncomfortable truth about modern governance: the very tools designed to manage information, protect security, and regulate platforms can, if unchecked, be weaponized to suppress dissent.